This week on Act Out, water wars in the West are heating up. And did you know that you could go to jail for more than a year for recycling? Next, Iran is on our shit list now more than ever, but why? And who actually deserves to be in the prime spot on that list? Finally, Michelle Saahene joins us to talk about the Starbucks call heard round the world. She was there, and as a black woman, she has a few things to say about the layers of racism manifested in that incident and beyond. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Brigade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. A noise flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. As it gets particularly hot, and as we once again seem to skip right over spring into summer, the issue of water floats to the fore. If you live in the West, you may not know that in reality, you shouldn't. And I don't mean to say that you did anything wrong, more to say that as Mark Reisner wrote in his book, Cadillac Desert, The American West and Its Disappearing Water, a place that receives 7 inches or less, as in Phoenix, El Paso, and Reno do, is arguably no place to inhabit at all. And furthermore, had humans never settled in Los Angeles, evolution, left to its own devices, might have created, in a million more years, the ideal creature for the habitat: a camel with gills. In other words, if you live in any of those places, you inhabit a desert. A desert where you ironically don't worry about showering or turning on a tap to fill your water filter. Sprinklers water the horribly out-of-place green squares outside of hotels and shops, while in the distance, stark desert rocks loom over humanity's folly. Roughly 40 million people, or 1 in 8 Americans, rely on the diverted and depleted Colorado River for their water supply. And for too long, we've been using too much. Between climate change and population hikes, the largest reservoir in the country, Lake Mead, which is fed by the Colorado River, is at a dangerously low level. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, the agency that's tasked with managing the Colorado River system, estimates that next year, Lake Mead will likely dip below the critical threshold of 1,075 feet above sea level. And what that means for users is a potential legally mandated cutback so as to avoid a free-for-all. But when it comes to water in the desert, it's really hard to play nice. In a recent report, Eric Holthaus outlines the looming water wars between the upper and lower basin, i.e. the areas above Lake Mead and below it. In the lower basin, Los Angeles, Vegas, and Phoenix look to the basin as a literal lifeline, but users in the upper basin, like Salt Lake City, Denver, and Albuquerque, are getting really nervous because of vastly dwindling snowpack in the Rockies. States in the upper basin recently accused the Central Arizona Water Conservation District of gaming the system so as to siphon more water from the reservoir. Arizona now denies these accusations, but meanwhile, Pueblo, Colorado, an upper basin city, pulled out of the Colorado River Conservation Program, citing Arizona's manipulation. Denver has threatened to pull out as well. As Holthaus writes, what's happening could be seen as the slow death of an era of easy living. The unwinding of a nearly 100-year-old series of multi-state compacts, collectively called the Law of the River, that's been widely viewed as too permissive. Over-reliance on the Colorado River has helped pave the way for rapid population growth across the region, from Southern California to Denver, which may now, ironically, begin to pose a threat to those same cities. And meanwhile, populations continue to grow. That region is expected to add 10 million more people in the next 40 years, at the same time as scientists predict with 99% certainty that by the end of the century, a mega drought will hit the Southwest with the power to kill nearly all trees, and thereby, of course, completely reshaping the region. And even those who think that they can sidestep the water wars by digging wells will find the groundwater depleted very quickly. In short, the people, the agriculture, indeed the country's breadbasket, all are in the crosshairs of a desert eager to take back its land. And in an ironic plot twist, we're helping it to do so. Moving on, the idea of conservation may be floating around in your mind after that last story. Well, imagine going to jail for successfully avoiding overconsumption and consumerism, because that's exactly what happened to Eric Lundgren, a prominent figure in the e-waste world, i.e., electronic waste. His work has focused on trying to mitigate the heaps of shit that we produce by constantly buying new phones and chucking out our computers because there are some compatibility issues, etc., etc. And as part of his work in reusing, repurposing, recycling, and rebuilding electronic components, he decided to manufacture some 28,000 Microsoft Restore disks so that users dealing with computer crashes could restore from a disk rather than just go out and buy another computer. Now, here is the really vital part of this case. The disks only work on a computer that already has a Windows license. So the gist is that since software is easy to duplicate, companies wanted a way to ensure that one copy of their software wasn't being used by an entire city block. So they introduced licensing. Single-use serial number type codes that are specific, in this case, to one machine. So this means that if I tried to install software from that disk on a computer that didn't have a license, it would do me a shit bit of good. Furthermore, Microsoft offers the software on the disk as a download from their own fucking website for free. So in other words, all Lundgren did was take the next step of putting that free downloadable software on a disk so that it can be easily popped into the computer for a restore. This is particularly important for people who, for example, don't have a DVD burner. Lundgren wanted to make it easy for folks to just visit a local repair shop, buy a restore disc for a couple of bucks, go home, restore, and then you and your computer will live happily ever after. A simple way to reduce waste, right? There's no harm done. As Devin Koldewey notes in a TechCrunch article on the subject, naturally, no actual damage was actually done. The damage is entirely theoretical and incorrect at that. A copy of Windows cannot be sold because it is freely provided. Only a license key can be sold, and those sales are what Microsoft alleges were affected. But Lundgren neither had nor sold any license keys. That's right. Microsoft claims that they lost hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in profit because of Lundgren's e-waste efforts. But how the fuck can you lose profit on something that you were giving out for free? It would only really make sense, I guess, kind of, if you thought that Lundgren had snuck some kind of malware onto the disk so as to infect thousands of computers. But even that suggestion was struck down in court. Microsoft declined to look into whether the disks might have had malware on them because it would have no bearing on the case, they said, which strikes me as ridiculous. Malware or the like would provide evidence of criminal intent by Lundgren or his supplier. But criminal intent, or indeed the safety of their clients' computers, is of little concern to Microsoft. In fact, Microsoft's own arguments rely on the fact that these were perfect copies, not compromised ones. And yet, Lundgren was slapped with the crime of producing counterfeit software, and thereby siphoning profits from Microsoft. Koldewey beautifully outlines this absurdity thusly: people weren't buying software, let alone counterfeit software. The disks in question are at best unauthorized copies of software provided for free by Microsoft, not really a term that carries a lot of legal or even rhetorical weight. I could make a recovery disk, then make another for my friend, who doesn't have a DVD burner. Is that copy authorized or not? And how could it be unauthorized if it's an image made available to users specifically for the purpose of burning recovery disks? How can it be counterfeit if it's just a copy of that image? Furthermore, how can it be pirated if the business model requires the end user to purchase a license key to activate the product? All really good questions, none of which the judges or Microsoft or even the U.S. Attorney General felt the need to answer. In fact, after an early morning raid on his house in Dallas, Lundgren flew to meet with the U.S. Attorney, who said this: "We don't care. We think you're a criminal, and I'm sorry, but Microsoft wants your head on a platter, and I'm going to give it to them." Those are the words that the U.S. Attorney said to me in that meeting, face to face. There's really nowhere to go from that. I told them, I'm a computer recycler. I have no criminal history. I'm not a criminal. You can look into this all you want, but I'm not going to go to prison over this because this isn't a crime. unless it's a crime to help people and help the environment. Apparently, it is, which Lundgren soon came to realize. He even tried to help things along by admitting and pleading guilty to counterfeiting the packaging of the discs, as they did look identical to the Dell branded ones. But no dice. Lundgren will now be in jail for more than a year because he had the audacity to set a good example, to cut into the capitalist consumerist golden rule of planned obsolescence, the idea that things are supposed to break down frequently so that we'll constantly have to go out and buy more and replace them. Microsoft isn't pissed that Lundgren downloaded free software and made some discs out of it. They're pissed that some of the people that would otherwise have gone out to buy a brand spanking new computer with a brand spanking new license would instead restore their old computer and get more mileage out of it. They're horrified that a potential sale could turn into an actual reuse. That's what will ultimately dent their bottom line, and that's why they wanted, and thanks to our justice system, that's why they ultimately got Lundgren's head on a platter. Moving on to our final headline this week, what happens when you cultivate the most extreme form of a religion that then goes on to spawn violent extremists around the world, but you also have oil? Well, then your name is Saudi Arabia, and we love you. Last week, Judge George B. Daniels of the Southern District Court of New York ruled that Iran is liable for $6 billion for the attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001. The lawsuit, originally filed in 2004 by families of 9/11 victims, actually named Saudi Arabia as the liable party for the attacks. Yet last month, attorneys representing the Gulf Kingdom successfully lobbied to add Iran to the legal proceedings via a tag-along action intended to consolidate litigation accusing the Islamic Republic of playing a role in the attacks. Yeah, the only problem is that while 15 of the 19 9/11 hijackers were Saudi citizens, none were Iranian citizens. Beyond that, there's literally zero evidence to suggest that Iran had anything to do with training or aiding at 9/11 terrorists. But there is plenty of evidence that Saudi Arabia did both. In order to understand this, we have to dig a little bit into history. Wahhabism first arose in the 18th century as an extremist sect that only really gained steam when befriended and uplifted by the Saudi family. Al-Saud found that he could use Wahhabism to forcibly unite and control the tribes of what we now consider to be the country of Saudi Arabia. Fast forward to today, and Wahhabism is a cornerstone of public schools in Saudi Arabia, teaching kids that Jews are apes, Christians are swine, and violence against homosexuals and dissidents is absolutely justified. And then it spread. As Medea Benjamin notes in her book, Kingdom of the Unjust, thousands of these schools sprang up along Pakistan's border and then inside Afghanistan itself, training not scholars, but fighters equipped with Wahhabi ideology and American weapons. They used Islam as a vehicle for creating a very disciplined guerrilla army with a clear anti-communist ideology. And if you're thinking, wait, wasn't bin Laden? Yes. The Wahhabist ideology that defines Saudi Arabia has spawned leaders like Osama bin Laden and terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda. The 9/11 attacks are a direct outgrowth of this fundamentalist ideology. And hey, don't just take Medea Benjamin's word for it. In 2009, a WikiLeaks revealed cable quotes then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Donors in Saudi Arabia constitute the most significant source of funding to Sunni terrorist groups worldwide. Saudi Arabia remains a critical financial support base for Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and other terrorist groups. Oh, awkward, Hillary, since you took like $10+ million from them and helped finalize weapons deals with them, thereby directly arming terrorists. Ooh. And thanks to the now global spread of Wahhabism helped along by our unwavering loyalty, in 2013 Strasbourg's European Parliament declared Salafism Wahhabism to be the main source of global terrorism, with a report linking it to the Benghazi attacks and the war in Syria, among other atrocities. According to the Daily Telegraph, some 15 to 20% of the $10 billion set aside by Saudi Arabia to promote its favored form of Islam may have been diverted to Al-Qaeda and other violent jihadists. And other violent jihadists includes Daesh or ISIS, the group that we keep whack-a-mole fighting while also supporting their largest supporters. But yeah, let's throw the book at Iran for dropping the dollar. Yeah, last week Iran dropped the dollar in favor of the euro and thereby added their name to a list of countries that have dropped the dollar, who we then also invaded. Iraq, Libya, and Syria all moved away from the petrodollar shortly before becoming the next winner of the Freedom Crusade raffle. In short, it's the economy, stupid. We don't put nations like China on the religious freedom violations list because we actually give two shits about religious freedom. We do it because, on that same day, Pakistan announced that it was going to drop the dollar in its trade with China. We don't invade countries because we're concerned about the well-being of its citizens or the spread of extremist ideologies that kill innocent people because we're their main cash cow. No. We invade countries because they have natural resources and or because they want to fuel neither our black gold habit nor our lopsided economic hegemony. Iran isn't a beacon of human rights for sure, but they're not responsible for 9/11. And as the corporate media falls over themselves to echo the official line of Iran being the top state sponsor of terror, remember who that title belongs to. Us. And the Saudis. Now, moving on, you've doubtlessly heard about the incident at Starbucks where a barista called the cops on two young black men who were, wait for it, sitting at a table waiting for someone to show up for a meeting. What you probably didn't know is that a young black woman first sounded the alarm that some shit was up and that it was not okay. The eventual video that went viral was filmed by a white woman who started filming after the black woman had been loudly and resolutely standing up for the two young men. And she was, of course, mostly ignored. In other words, the Starbucks incident is not only a glaring example of the racism showcased by the barista and the cops who came, but also the bystanders. A black woman standing up and speaking loudly is pushed aside, ignored. So here to talk more about the deep-seated knee-jerk racism exemplified in this recent incident is Michelle Saahene, the woman who initially stood up when everyone else stayed seated. Take a look.
I think part of the reason why I was so fired up that day was because I had noticed it from the very beginning, and I felt as though a lot of other people hadn't. The woman whose video went viral, Melissa DePina, we're actually great friends now. She told me that I had been standing up there for a while before anyone noticed. And she said, Michelle, to be honest, I don't know if I would have said anything or started recording had you not been so animated and so loud about it. And that kind of it did infuriate me to realize that I had been standing up there recording and people weren't paying attention. It was like out of sight, out of mind. The cops talking to these two men, not my business. Let me go on about my day. And it's funny because white people and people in general think that this was like an isolated incident. And it just goes to show you that people are not opening their eyes to what's happening right in front of their faces. And it doesn't matter if they were drug addicts, if they were criminals, or they were anything. But because they were so respectful and they were so calm and they didn't put up a fight, they were like, well, that's so obvious to us. And that was a very obvious, display of discrimination. Whereas, if they were loud or if they had fought back, that would have given a few of them a little bit of, what's the word I'm going to say? Excuse to be like, well, look at how they acted.
And there's also a stark difference in how white people are allowed to often act in front of cops versus how blacks are. I mean, there was a recent video that went up of somebody protecting against a potential pipeline that was cursing at a police officer, and I was right there with her. I was like, yeah, fuck those cops for trying to remove you from protecting your land. But at the same time, if a black person then starts cussing at cops, it's a completely different scenario and likely not one where the cop just turns around and walks away.
Not at all. There was another video recently of a woman talking to two police officers. I think they had been pulled over, and she was like, you need to shut up, give me your badge number. The cop even gave her his badge number, and they were just standing there, and she's yelling at them and being incredibly disrespectful. And the video kind of went a little viral, and it was like, and she's still alive. I grew up in a very white neighborhood, and I grew up with some race issues and some self-identity issues coming from African parents. Coming to America, it was, you don't want to think of yourself as this person that's going to be targeted. You don't want to feel as though people don't like you because of your skin color, because my parents have a lot of pride in where they come from. And so I find, and I'm not the only one, I know that a lot of Black people, I feel, try to assimilate with white culture just so that they don't feel that pain, feel that burden. It really took me years and years to be comfortable with myself and to just accept the fact that this is where we live, you know? And I think that's really hard for a lot of people to think about the fact that your skin color, your hair, your features are hated by so many people. But how do you turn that into, I guess, activism? You know, how do you turn that into educating people? And that's what I'm trying to do right now. Is it shocked me how many people, one, thought it was an isolated incident, how many people tried to somehow, people that weren't even there especially, try to somehow spin or justify, well, maybe they did something. Maybe it's like they really don't understand where they live. They don't know the history. They don't know the culture.
And the just the idea that racism is something, or colonialism for that matter, is something that we used to have a problem with, but now we're okay. Now we're all friends, and Black people, Indigenous people should just get over it and move on. And I think a big problem with white people, even that I talk to, is that they don't think that they're racist. You know, it's this idea that, well, no, I'm not racist, and it's like, no, you are. And by admitting it, you know, it's like being an alcoholic. You have to admit it in order to deal with it. You can't possibly grow up in America without being racist. And racism is a spectrum. So it's
Right.
like, it doesn't mean that just because you're racist that you're a member of the KKK. There are
Right.
levels of racism, and it's actually really, really dangerous now because the overt racism is not considered okay, but the covert racism is perpetuated and considered legitimized.
Mm-hmm. Well, I actually asked the barista, because I asked the cop first. I said, why are you arresting them? And he looked at me and he said, go ask the barista. So I said, okay. And I asked her, why did you call the cops? And she's all flustered and getting all red. And she's like, well, I can't say. And I'm like, well, I can say. I watched the entire thing happen. They asked her to use the bathroom. They didn't do anything. So what? I go, did you feel like your life was threatened? She wouldn't look at me. She wouldn't talk to me. She just looked down at the coffee or whatever. And so I asked her again. I said, did you feel threatened in any way? She couldn't answer me. She was silent. She couldn't even come up in her own mind why she would have called the cops on them. She had no idea. When you see a room full of people not drinking coffees, she couldn't even in her own mind put together, why did I call the cops on them? So instead she just shut down and she just ignored me.
So 8,000 stores in the US on May 29th are going to be closed, 8,000 Starbucks stores, for what they are calling anti-bias training. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because that's kind of a vague name. And then, of course, the question is, who's leading these trainings? You know, is it somebody who's familiar with Malcolm X or familiar with the Black Panthers or familiar with Black history? And so I wanted to get your take on those quote unquote anti-bias trainings that Starbucks announced it would be doing.
I mean, it's a nice gesture, but I think it's bullshit. I think it's for publicity. I think it's just to get their name back in good graces. Every time you start a new job, they have those trainings already. Anti-sexual harassment, anti-bribery, anti-money laundering, anti-harassment in the workplace just in general, anti-racism. They have those trainings at every job. That doesn't stop people the very next day from sexually harassing someone. That doesn't stop someone from the very next day from calling someone the N-word. It doesn't stop those things. So that's actually, you brought up a good point. Who's running these trainings? How are you going about it? How are you educating people? Like, what are you saying? Just don't be, people know not to be racist. Like, they're gonna do it anyway. That woman would have done that if she worked at Joe's Coffee or Dunkin' Donuts, anywhere. It doesn't have to be a Starbucks for her to do those things. And so, like I said, it's a nice gesture, I guess, but I don't know. I'm a little bit you don't you don't erase someone's racism in 4 hours of training.
So finally, I wanted to, because you had mentioned earlier that you're trying to figure out how best to address these issues, and particularly how white people can fight the embedded racism that we have that's programmed into us by the system. What are some of the efforts that you're looking to work with after this incident?
So we're actually trying to come up with some kind of social media campaign and also maybe some events around the city. We've met every week since it's happened. Me and Melissa, we're trying to really find white people who are empathetic to to Black oppression. We're trying to find them to help them encourage those conversations, have those tough conversations, and help them kind of narrate those conversations. I think a huge benefit would be to educate people on what's really been going on because they're blind to it. The government isn't going to tell you that we use Black people for our political agenda. They're not going to tell you that. So how do we educate those people? And so we're really trying to find people that are already empathetic to our situation to come together to encourage those conversations, because each conversation reaches a new person. Each conversation opens up their mind a little bit, and we are trying to change the world somehow. We're just trying to figure out exactly what avenues, who to reach out to, maybe get some celebrities on board that are already activists, doing this work already. And so that's currently what we're working on.
So this is a portion of our full interview with Michelle Saahene. To see the full interview, please check out our YouTube page at youtube.com/Occupy.com. And we'll also include that link in the show notes as well. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thanks so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people that you don't know. Again, check out the last slide and the show description to find sites that I've mentioned in this week's show. And for interim updates, as well as posted videos, images, and articles, visit us on social media. And to those who have donated to keep us going, thank you so much. Please keep spreading the word in order to ensure our ability to keep acting out. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some roster through. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left for nothing, motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been begging our bitch by inch, we got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since your puss deserved my shove. I'm not a violent man, but I will kill for